All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Ali Puchinsky. I am one of RANE's two cyber analysts, and joining me today is our other cyber analyst, Haley Benedict. And today we will be discussing some of the recent developments that we've seen about targets to critical infrastructure in cyberspace and what this could mean going forward. So to start, Haley, can you tell our audience a bit about this recent report by Mandiant?
Yeah, so researchers at Mandiant have just discovered a new Russian linked malware that is specifically designed to disrupt industrial control systems and electrical power generation, but they're not quite sure if it was created as a red teaming tool to simulate power disruptions or if it was developed for malicious purposes. But they did find it on Virus Total, which is a place where people can submit malware for analysis. So that's really unusual. So they were saying that if it was developed for red teaming, it was probably uploaded there as a mistake, but that threat actors will also sometimes do this so they can determine kind of what the antivirus detections rates are and see how good it is at evading that detection. But it is just really unusual for those kinds of codes to be discovered or disclosed to the public. And then another thing that they noted that was notable is that it was really similar to the Indestroyer malware, which was previously used to target Ukraine's power systems.
Right. I remember that was first in 2016, and then there was another attempt to deploy malware against Ukraine's electric grid at the beginning of the war, which, the story actually comes recently following another report I recall about an industrial control system malware that researchers found was almost deployed actually against US targets in the early weeks of the Russian-Ukrainian war. And these industrial control system malware, I believe this was the seventh that was discovered today, or maybe the eighth, but they have a lot of ability to take electric grids offline and disrupt other aspects of critical infrastructure, ranging from energy facilities to transportation infrastructure. And Haley, for our audience, what kinds of threat actors beyond state-sponsored actors do you think would potentially use these kinds of malware, and what would their end objectives be, and what would be the risks associated with those potential attacks?
Yeah, so there are a lot of risks that are associated with these kinds of attacks. Definitely, it's something that can impact business operations on a grand scale. Any disruption to the power grid is going to impact your ability to carry out your operations. It can impact transportation. Hacktivists could also, that's an actor that could definitely take advantage of some of these malwares if they were to obtain them, kind of as a way to achieve a political objective, send a message. I know, Ali, you recently wrote a lot about hacktivists too, so I'm sure you're familiar with all kinds of reasons why they would do this.
Right, and I know about a month or two ago, actually, the Europe's transportation agency actually published a first of its kind report outlining this rise in hacktivist activity, really focusing on these operational technology systems that are inherently connected to a lot of these critical infrastructure facilities, which is definitely worrisome. But it's important to note for our audience that primarily we've only seen hacktivist activity conducted through much smaller tactical attacks. For example, distributed denial of service attacks, which can take a company or state website offline, but is typically back up and running within a few hours and really doesn't result in any kind of further operational damage beyond that. Outside of these industrial control system malware risks, Haley, I know that we also recently saw another development pertaining to critical infrastructure yesterday with Microsoft. Do you want to tell the audience a bit about that report?
Yeah, so that was a really notable development because it was showing how the espionage involved in that was a lot grander than originally thought, that there was evidence to disclose. Um, yeah, I think that there are a lot of risks and implications to that too, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, and I know in that case it was the largest cyber espionage, or one of the largest cyber espionage campaigns that we'd seen from specifically Chinese threat actors in a long time. And the fact that it targeted various critical infrastructure, although we don't know the extent of it, we do know that one of the affected areas was Guam, which, of course, is a very strategic US territory in the Asia Pacific region. And again, while there's not a lot known about this report, there are definitely concerns that this kind of cyber espionage could be used to inform, for example, Chinese military personnel about a situation in Taiwan if relations were to further escalate, or if China did prep itself for a military invasion of Taiwan. These kinds of cyber espionage activities into US territories in Guam or even other regional countries could have a big impact on both the US's ability to support Taiwan in that situation, or for Taiwan itself to be prepared for an attack like that.
I've got a question for you, Ali, about maybe some of these more disruptive attacks. So you just went over kind of the broad risks for espionage and why that matters, what it can be used for. But back to kind of these reports on the growing threats of the intersection between physical threats and cyber threats with the new malware that Mandiant just reported on. So, how likely are these going to be deployed against the United States, or do you think that this is something that would be really common? What's your take on that?
Sure. So, of course, while these malware variants are highly alarming for their capability, it's important for us to note for our audience and be explicitly clear about the fact that we would very likely not see the deployment of any of these industrial control system malwares in situations other than an active military conflict or something really closely resembling that. And while we see different risk calculuses among different adversarial actors, such as China and Russia, for example, Russia is known for being much more uh, risk tolerant than China, even in the case of Russia and that report by Dragos, which showed that Russian threat actors had come close to deploying an industrial control system malware, or in the very least had there was evidence that they may have considered it. That is still a red line that countries won't really cross. And if Russia had, it very well could have escalated into a war between Russia and the West. And so that's really why you still don't see countries moving beyond this red line. And in the same vein of thought, China very likely would not deploy this kind of malware against a target like the United States in anything other than a military conflict over Taiwan potentially, which again, we don't see any evidence is going to happen in the near future. I think to your point, Haley, a bigger concern are these groups like hacktivists, which while they don't have the capabilities, or we don't see evidence that they really have the capabilities to wield cyber tools like this, in the future, if they do develop those kinds of capabilities, or they're able to get their hands on malware strains like this one that you outlined today, they don't necessarily have the same risk calculus because they're not as held to international norms or other geopolitical and economic considerations. And so I think our really big concern would be if one of these hacktivist groups decided to deploy something like an industrial control system malware against a transportation facility, an energy grid, or any other kind of critical infrastructure. I think this would be the worst case but more plausible scenario between a state-sponsored actor deploying something like this or a hacktivist. But
Yeah.
again, it's we this isn't hopefully a very near-term risk or fear that we should be staying up at night about.
But
But
that is something that the Mandiant report did kind of highlight, was that these tools, like these types of strains, are not usually disclosed or discovered, shown to the public in any way. But here it is being uploaded to not a public server, but it's being uploaded to something that's shared with a broader security community. So that's concerning, because then it's if there's multiple places that are housing this malware, it's a little bit, even if they're secured, there's more opportunities for actors to target that and try and obtain those strains. And then there's also just a growing threat kind of with this specific malware, because it's written in Python. It's pretty easy to learn. It's pretty easy to, it's not a very complicated code. So it's showing how it's lowering kind of the barrier of entry for this, because they can learn from past attacks, past codes, and develop new ones that can target critical infrastructure.
Absolutely. To your point, the threat landscape is always expanding and evolving. So
Yeah.
thankfully, I think we'll still be in our line of work for the foreseeable future. But anyways, I think we can wrap up here. Thank you, everyone, for joining Haley and I today for this discussion. And if you want to hear more about our geopolitical analysis, please visit us at ranenetwork.com and have a wonderful long weekend.